The Aquila16 has been a favorite among pilots for some time now, and I can see why. This thing looks really good, it's lightweight, and has really decent flight time. But the question I get repeatedly is, how do I get better footage from this small little drone? Well, today we'll be doing just that. So if you want to get HD footage from your Aquila16, this is the video for you, so stick around. Okay, so here are all our parts to make this whole system work. Now, as I said before, the Aquila16 is a very light drone and you don't want to add additional weight to it. So the first thing you'll need is an action camera that's very light. Today we'll be using the Runcam Thumb. And this one here is very light, coming in around 9 grams. Now this records around 1080p, around 60 frames per second. But if you do want to stabilize the image, you will get a reduction in quality, so around 50 frames per second. And that shouldn't be a big issue for people around the world or if you're flying outdoors. But if you're going to fly in the United States, then that could be an issue if you're going to fly indoors among lights and you might have some flickering in your background. So do understand that limitation. Besides that, this is a pretty cool camera. I've done a full review on this one and it has been popular for some time now. So it's really affordable. You can get this around below 50 bucks, around $34 to $35. So this is a really good fit for this drone. Beyond that, you're gonna need some kind of a mount. Now, typically the Runcam Thumb does come shipped with a mount. I think this is the original one for it actually, and we'll be using this on this project. Now, the next thing you'll need is somewhere to secure this to your actual Aquila16. Now, this one has some holes in it. I really don't recommend that you drill some holes in your Aquila16, especially since the camera and VTX stays right in the front of the drone. In my case, I'm going to be using something a little bit temporary. I'll be using the double-side tape. You can use any other adhesive, maybe a heat gun and some glue. Maybe not instant or crazy glue because that's kind of brittle, but whatever you have laying around might work. Now, in this case, I am using double-side tape because I don't want to make this a permanent install on this drone. But there might be some sacrifices or compromises with this method only because this may have or introduce some wobbles since it's not that sturdy. And I do think using some kind of a glue or adhesive might give you better results for as far as stabilization, but it might do some damage to the drone if you use some glue. So in this case, I don't want to damage my drone and I'll use a double-side tape. Now finally, you will need the original harness for your Runcam Thumb. In this case, I have it right here. I have mine modified for my previous drones. So in this case, I will have to cut the wire here. We'll talk more about this when we get to the bench and install this into the drone. So having said that, let's go to the bench and get this whole thing assembled. Okay, so we're here at the workbench. We have our Aquila16 and we have our camera here and supplies. Now, before we begin here, the first thing I want to talk about is just our concerns here, what it takes to get this thing wired up and the philosophy behind this camera here. Now, my first concern, or my biggest concern, is actually how to wire this to the drone. Now, traditionally, you would wire this to the back of the camera and wire this to either the flight controller or, in my case, to the balance lead of a battery. In that case, I can transfer this camera from drone to drone and you should be fine. Now, that's pretty easy on larger drones. Obviously, they can carry this small light camera. But with this right here, we have this proprietary battery right here with no balance lead. In fact, this is a 1S battery. So even if this had a traditional battery, there was no way for us to tap into it because there's no real balance lead to plug this into. So that's gonna be a concern. So our next option is to just wire this to the flight controller. That brings up another problem. Now, this is a beginner drone. There really isn't any instructions for this or any kind of schematics for this flight controller, at least at the time of filming. And that kind of makes sense a little bit because this is a beginner drone. Beta FPV isn't going to expect pilots or beginner pilots to go in here and start tweaking the flight controller. So there's really no documentation on how to wire this. I really don't even know if there's an extra pad in here. Well, I know because I opened it up in the past, but there really isn't any way to figure out if there's a way to wire this. So if there's no like 5-volt pad on this, there really isn't a way to power this up. Now this is going to take between 2 and I think 4S battery source if I remember correctly. But it requires more than a 1S power source. So 5 volts should be enough to power this up. So the first thing to do is to access the flight controller. So in that case, we're just gonna unscrew this bottom plate here. We have 4 screws. All right, so if this is your first time doing this, it's in your best interest to keep everything organized. You don't wanna lose these screws. So I'm just gonna put it right here. So here's 1, 2, 3, and we're missing one more. Here it is 4. And it's as easy as just removing this plate. Let's see if it comes off. There it is. Put that right here. And now we have access to the flight controller. And this might be a little bit intimidating at first. I haven't worked in here. I just took up the cover to see if there was a pad in here. But you have your plugs here for your motors. You have your optical flow and laser sensor here to keep this thing hovering. And then you have some plugs in the back here to go from the board to your VTX and camera. What I'm looking for here is a pad to mount this on here. It's pretty cool. It looks like we actually have a T1 and a R1. So in case you wanted to add some accessories, I don't know what, that's available to you. And then there's also a T2 on a R2. Wow. Oh, I see it. Wow, that's buried in there. So it's gonna be hard to see, but it's right under the optical flow sensor, right next to the harness that goes to power on the VTX. So we'll just unplug these harnesses, remove them, and then unscrew these 4 bolts and take this flight controller out of here. So let's just unplug these wires and be gentle with them because you do have to reinstall them. All right, so all 4 motor wires are out. I'm just gonna unscrew these 4 screws holding the flight control to the frame. All right, all 4 are loose. Let's try to get them out of here. And you also wanna save these. And technically this flight controller should be free. I'm trying to see if there's anything else holding it. The only thing I see is this power lead, which we won't have access to until I lift this up. Cool, they have rubber grommets on them to prevent vibration. There we go. Cool. All right, so this BT 2.0 plug, I think it's being held in by 2 bolts. See, there's no schematics for this flight controller. So on the other side, I also see a 5-volt pad. It's gonna be hard to see that right here. The L, I don't know what that's for, probably for LEDs, and then a ground. So this would be even better for me to solder. It's not among other things. The only problem is that usually with flight controller and LED pads, I'm taking that back. Usually you have to configure it in the configurator to assign it. But since we're not using the L, which is the LED, just a 5-volt on the ground, these 2 should be hot once you power on the drone. So I think I'm gonna go with the LED route. Just this 5-volt and the ground. And that's what I'll do. I have enough space to do this like this. And I think that's what I'm gonna do. I don't wanna have a hassle with this BT 2.0 in the end. All right, so take your harness for your Runcam thumb. I already have mine converted for larger drones, but I'll have to unsolder it. I need a knife. That right there, we're gonna tin that. I'm gonna put the soldering iron on. Time to put some solder on this flight controller. All right, let's do it. All right, that looks good. Let's do the ground. That looks good. All right, here's the real fun part. Now I need to know where I want to install this harness because I'll have to pass it through one of these vents on here. I think the one on this side here might be the best vent for me. It's the largest. I'm gonna use this second one from the front. Hopefully you can see that. And that's the one I'm gonna just fish this through. There you go. Now that that's through here, now I can hook it up to the pads here. And that's it. Once we get it done, it should be good to go. So let's do the 5-volt one first. All right, that held. Ideally, you want to use a thinner tip. This is a pretty broad tip for bigger drones, but we are gonna use this one right here. All right, it wasn't a pain. All right, so we have our ground and our 5-volt pad connected, and that's it. Well, I say that's it. I was gonna plug it in, but I don't want to plug it in with nothing connected to it. So I'm gonna try to reassemble this. And the first thing I need to do is flip this back over. And it's just the opposite of removal. So we're just gonna put this through here. Make sure you have the orientation of the flight controller the same way as you took it out. There is an arrow on here that says front, this arrow, so that should be facing the front of the drone. But you do want to get that correct. All right, it's back in there. Let's secure these things. All right, just tighten these down. Don't over tighten it. This is all plastic. Okay, so we have the flight controller back in here. Here's our harness, looks really good. And we're just gonna plug these motors back into the flight controller. And the last one, 4. All right, so we have all 4 motors back in. Whew. And then the last one was for the VTX. We don't wanna forget that one. Put that one right in here. That is it. That's it, that was the hardest part. Well, I guess that's the hardest part. All right, let's put this cover back on, right there. We have our bolts. We're just gonna put the 1, 2, 3, 4, and that should be it. Perfect. All right, so we have all 4. The plate is on, and our Aquila16 looks the same way as before we started, with the exception of this small little harness right here. The actual configuration part, or the part of soldering it, is done. Now here comes the easy part. I use that in quotations only because it's always the easy parts that gets to you. All right, so I want to go overkill, but not at the same time. Let's measure this out. And I think that's all I'm gonna do. Like, I don't have any more I want to do here. Let's just peel this off. As you can see, I'm just going to peel off the adhesion. All right, so this is my concern. As I said before, instead of using glue, I'll see how this one works out, and then if it's too much vibration, I might use glue. But I can already see, because you have 2 surfaces using the Velcro, it's not as direct. I can still see some shifting. So there you go, you have your mount here for your camera. So we have the physical part done, we have the electrical part done. Let's mount this up and see how it looks. So I'm just gonna, just like any other camera, line this up. Perfect. Let's get the driver. The nut holds it. Wow, we barely have enough length. So what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna put the battery on here. Let me get a fresh battery. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna plug it in. Time is here. I don't see anything. I don't see anything. No. Actually, what the frig? Shit. Boom. It wasn't reverse. All right, so don't be like me. And when I say don't be like me, I mean that in the sense like, make sure the polarity is correct. That's all. All right, so that works. That was enough power to power on the Runcam thumb. So the question is, how much does this weigh? And can this thing fly with it? All right, let's put this on the scale, see how much it weighs. 86 grams, 87 grams. Okay, so now that we know how much it weighs, the balance doesn't feel that bad. It feels pretty decent. But now we have HD on the Aquila. This is what everyone wanted. So, how does it fly? How does it record? Well, let's go outside and find out. Okay, so we're back from our test bite, and the Aquila16 proves it can carry an action camera, or at least an HD action camera. So having done this whole process, what have we learned from this entire process, and should you do this to your Aquila16? Well, the image coming from the Runcam Thumb was acceptable, and it's significantly better than the analog feed coming from this camera right here on the drone. Obviously, we're doing a 480p analog scratchy with interference compared to a 1080p clear interference-free image from the Runcam Thumb. So it's a significant increase in image quality. So if that's what you're looking to do, then it's a no-brainer. Yes, you can put an HD action camera on here and you should get really clear results. Now, on the other hand, if you're looking for smooth cinematic images, just clean, smooth, buttery images, is this really worth it? Well, it depends, yes and no. Now, to make this whole thing work here, obviously you need a HD camera and some kind of a gyro information to stabilize the image. Luckily for us, the Runcam Thumb does provide gyro information. You do need a software like GyroFlow to stabilize this whole image. Now, this is where the difficulty begins, and depending on how much time and experience you have with your gyro software like GyroFlow, then it can determine whether this is worth it or not. Now, this is one of the few cameras in the market that's this light. This thing is only 9 grams, and you can make this even lighter if you make it a naked Runcam Thumb. So I don't think there's any other action camera in the market this light. Now, you have the Runcam Thumb Pro, which is a little bit higher quality, 4K. It has better gyro information, but it's, I think, starting at 16 grams. So it's significantly heavier than this one right here. And I don't know if this drone here can carry that. It's worth a try, but it's also a larger camera as well. Now, I bring this up only because the issue that we're having, or the hurdle that you have to get over, is to stabilize this image. Now, the gyroscopic information from the Runcam Thumb, it does generate a gyro information, but the problem is that gyro information or data is somewhat not reliable, or is very inconsistent. That's the better word, it's not consistent. Now, what I mean by that is that this gyro information tends to drift over time. So typically with GyroFlow, you would sync your points and it would try to sync the actual optical image with the gyroscopic information on here and therefore smooth the image out. So what's happening is that it might pick a certain point, or say the first sync point, sync it to your image on here, but then after a few seconds, the image is gonna drift, and then now the gyro data is different than the actual video data, and then you see some more vibrations in the image to the point where it's actually doing more harm than good to your image. So you're seeing artificial or inaccuracies, and now your image is just vibrating for no apparent reason. This is one of the downfalls or issues we had when we first reviewed this camera overall. Now, there's multiple tutorials on YouTube from other users showing you how to actually stabilize this image, and some people have gotten really good results. So if you're gonna do this for yourself, I would search for those tutorials and try to make the best of it. And I'm sure this varies from person to person and from camera to camera. Yes, could I have put another hour or 2 hours just to stabilize a 2-minute video? Sure, but for most users, that's just way too much time for, what, 20 seconds? So we're talking about a 2-3 minute flight time. You gotta chop the video up for the best part. You're gonna only get like 20 or 30 seconds per recording. So to spend 2 hours on just 20 seconds, it may not be worth it. The juice isn't worth the squeeze, as they say. So it all depends. So it's kind of a hit miss with this total solution on here. So if you do have the time and you really want stabilized high quality HD footage from your Aquila16, this mod here is down your alley. You should really do it. Now, having said that, let's talk about some tips you might want to apply to get the best results from your Runcam Thumb. And the first thing is physically mounting this. You will get better results if you can hard mount this to your drone. As I said before in the beginning of this video, I did a temporary, I'm using Velcro on here, and it's actually a little better now than before. But if the mount here is not secure, you're gonna have a little bit of wobbles and vibration in your camera feed. That's gonna add to the gyroscopic information being affect it or influence even more. This thing already has not the best gyro information on there, but to introduce even more vibration because your mount isn't sturdy is going to make it hard to stabilize the image in gyro flow. So first thing, if you don't mind this installation here, try to do a more permanent or more sturdy mount. Use maybe a hot glue to stick it straight to the actual frame on here. In my case, this one here isn't too bad. All Velcros are different on here. In this case, I do have a little bit of a gap in here between the two. Let's see if it's gonna focus on it. And that difference here can make this thing oscillate a little bit. But as you can see, it's relatively sturdy. So I don't think I can do any better than that. The second thing here is making sure that you understand the flight controller and make sure you're soldering to the right pad. Now this thing here requires at least 5 volts. Now typically the normal way I usually power this camera is by using a balance lead to the actual lead to the regular battery. But because this is not only a 1S battery, which is less than 5 volts, this is also a proprietary battery with no balance leads on it. So I just have to wire it to the flight controller, hence the reason why we opened up the drone to wire this directly to the flight controls. The third thing is that making sure that your cable is long enough. In my case, you can see that the cable here is disconnected, and I can reconnect it obviously, but then I'm also limited by the tilt of the camera on here. Although my cord does reach the camera, it really limits my adjustability of the camera. Now I can have more tilt in there to fly faster, obviously, but if I want to fly slow, I can't have the tilt as shallow as I want. So make sure that the wire on this is long enough to reach the camera, but not long enough to go into the propeller. So in my case, I wish my wire was just a few millimeters longer. Okay, so the fourth advice I have for you is to change the camera settings on here. Now you can just pull this out the box, hit record, and you can get pretty decent images. But as I've done testing on this with 2 reviews on this camera, and then now here again, this is my 3rd time reviewing this camera on here, it's to your advantage to change the settings on here. Now you can do that via a notepad file that's saved to the SD card in here, and you can change the parameters or text on there, whether it be saturation, contrast, aspect ratios, you have the frame rate, you can change all those things on here. And the big thing about this camera here from the box is that it's a little bit bright, it's overexposed. So you do want to reduce the exposure on here. You see I also have an ND filter on here. So you do want to change the settings on this to fit your specific environments. Now I can put my settings on there, but it's not going to matter because you might be in a different environment where there's more clouds, less clouds, more brightness. I would highly recommend to get the most out of your camera is to change the settings on your RunCam thumb. Last but not least, you want to get very familiar with your stabilization software. In my case, I'm using GyroFlow, and you're going to get the most out of this camera by knowing how to use that software as best as you can. In my case, I kind of gave up after like an hour and a half of just tinkering with this. But if you're very versed with that software, you can get really professional results with that software, guys. So let me know what you think about this. Was this worth it? I know a lot of guys were asking about, can I get HD footage? Can I put a RunCam thumb on there? How do you put a RunCam thumb on there? And this is the video for it. Let me know what you think about the image. And this is something that you are willing to take up. Let me know in the comment section below. I'm curious to know. Having said that, I've done full reviews both on the RunCam thumb as well as the Aquila16. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in those videos. Peace.